Hi, everybody. Yes, it is Jeff Clayton once again in the 5-minute saxophone lesson. And once again, I have a very good friend of mine. You've met him before. His name is Dr. Ray Briggs. And I've been asking him questions off camera about jazz music, and it's so interesting. He was talking about this thing called the jazz craze. Is that like the Roaring Twenties? Or?
Yeah, exactly.
Really?
That's right, yeah, the Roaring Twenties. So this is when jazz actually becomes a popular music. And it's the popular music. It's as big then in the 20s and in the 30s as rock and roll was in the 50s. In fact, some of the jazz musicians were treated like the first, you might say, heartthrobs or icons that we find in people like Elvis Presley, the kind of level that they'd aspired to. A lot of the New Orleans musicians started to move around at that point. Now, it's important
to move around the country?
Move around the country.
Okay.
Now, there's a couple of explanations. The generic historic explanation is Storyville, which is kind of the red light district of New Orleans,
exactly,
was closed down. And therefore, musicians are forced to go out and find other work. Now, there are two things wrong with that definition, or that explanation. One, musicians like Jelly Roll Morton from New Orleans had already left way before then. So that wasn't why they left. And the second thing is, you have to look across African Americans throughout the South. By the 1920s, there's a big movement called the Great Migration, where they're just leaving in hundreds of thousands, leaving the South going north. Part of it is because after World War I, for those war veterans who survived and came back, they were very disenfranchised for coming back to a society that treated them like second-class citizens. If you've been out jumping in foxholes, watching your buddies getting blown to bits, then you come back to a society that treats you lesser than what you've put your life in the line to deserve, then very quickly you start to reevaluate what's going on.
Right, maybe search for another place to be that is more in keeping with the way you thought you wanted to live after all that was over.
That's it. So there's a mass migration going towards the north. So they take with them all these southern traditions, music and so forth. Mm-hmm. Jazz really explodes in Chicago. This is going to be the center of jazz activity. New York will lag a little bit, a few years after that, but it'll mainly be in Chicago. People like Louis Armstrong will be there in the 20s.
Yeah. He'll
come to actually play in King Oliver's band, who was kind of his mentor from New Orleans. Now, when he's there, they're playing. This is one of the reasons that jazz has a bad name. We talked about the prostitution, derogatory part.
Exactly.
But now, from 1919 to 1933, there's a Volstead Act in place, and that's prohibition.
Volstead Act?
The Volstead Act.
Okay.
So for that span, alcohol is illegal. But in Chicago, as you know, it didn't stop people from drinking. Mm-hmm. It just means you got to do it now without the feds or people catching you.
Exactly.
And sometimes the feds knew, and they also allowed it, turned a blind eye to get paid.
Yeah, and they wanted to drink too.
Yeah, exactly. So jazz then begins to be associated with the underworld. So if you look at where the places, some of the clubs where Louis Armstrong would play and King Oliver would play, Lil Hardin, his second wife, would play, they were owned by the mob. So then people who were morally upstanding, self-respecting, middle class, upper class, they look down on jazz because that's the music that's in those places. They were called speakeasies. And a speakeasy is a place where you could go hear music but buy alcohol illegally.
I never knew that. I've always seen the speakeasy and the different clubs that call themselves speakeasy, but I thought they were just talking nice to folks when they came in.
No, and in fact it was very harsh for African American musicians there. This is all during Jim Crow, so segregation is in place.
Sure.
A lot of these clubs, some of the most famous clubs, especially in New York, like the Cotton Club in the 20s, was really big. Duke Ellington's band's playing there. They call them black and tan clubs. And a black and tan club is where you can go as a musician to play if you're black, but you cannot go as a patron. So all the clientele are white. And even during the breaks, you couldn't just go out and sit down at the table with the audience and say, oh, so I like my music. Oh, yeah, you sound great. Buy me a drink. No.
No, you weren't allowed to.
No, you weren't allowed. You went back in
Fraternize.
no fraternization at all. You went out in the alley and waited until it's time for you to play again.
Oh, so that's where the song comes from. In the alley with Sally. I love it.
So it's an interesting time that historically a lot of African Americans are moving, and the Southern tradition is being carried now to the urban environment, where you're mixing orchestral arrangements. Duke Ellington was also interested in classical music. A lot of African Americans were interested in classical music.
Sure.
But there was no place for them in the orchestra. So all that intellect, ability, energy was funneled into jazz.
Into jazz. And it makes so much sense now. Wow, it's so clear. Wow, everybody, this is so great. It's so great that you're here and digging what we call jazz music with the 5-minute saxophone lesson and my friend Dr. Ray Briggs. Thank you very much. I'll talk to you next time.